I won the stay through a small photography forum I had followed for years. It wasn't a raffle in the usual sense. Someone posted about a private landowner offering a free 3-night stay at a remote cabin in exchange for photos they could use on a website later. They called it a writer's retreat cabin, though the photos showed nothing special. A single-room structure with a wood stove, a desk, and a wide window facing trees. Snow still covered the ground in every image. I commented out of boredom, sent a few links to my work, and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, an email arrived with directions, a lock code, and a reminder that there was no cell service for miles. I drove for hours after the paved road ended. The last gas station was shuttered, the pumps wrapped in yellow tape from winter storms. Snow lined the shoulders in hard gray piles. The forest felt tight and close, branches bent under weight that hadn't melted yet. When I reached the final turn, the road narrowed to a rutted path with no tire marks ahead of me. I parked beside the cabin just before dusk. The place sat low among the trees, half buried by snowbanks. No other buildings were visible. No tracks led away from it. Inside, the air smelled like cold wood and old smoke. The temperature matched the outdoors. I set my bag down and walked the room slowly, letting my eyes adjust. A narrow bed against one wall, a table under the window, shelves with mismatched mugs, and a small cast-iron stove in the corner. On the table sat a thick notebook with a rubber band wrapped around it twice. A pen rested on top, dried ink clinging to the tip. The cover read guest log in block letters. Nothing decorative. The pages were filled. Names, dates, short notes about weather, about writing progress, about silence. Some entries were neat. Others were rushed, slanted, written with a hand that pressed too hard. I flipped through a dozen pages, then set it aside. It felt like a normal thing for a place like this. A shared ritual. Proof that others had been there and left without trouble. I unpacked, lit the stove, and took photos while there was still light. I documented the frost on the window edges, the way the snow reflected blue shadows at sunset, the cabin half swallowed by trees. My camera timestamps matched the time on my watch. Nothing felt off. I ate, cleaned up, and wrote for a few hours until my eyes burned. The silence was deep but not strange, the kind that presses in when snow absorbs sound. Before sleeping, I remembered the log. I signed my name on the next blank line, wrote the date, and added a short note about arriving late and hoping for clear skies. My handwriting looked like it always did, uneven, slightly cramped. I closed the book, wrapped the band back around it, and placed it where I'd found it. The first night passed without incident. I woke once to the stove clicking as it cooled, and once to a branch snapping somewhere outside. Normal sounds. Morning came pale and quiet. I photographed the light crawling across the snow and spent the day editing and writing. The cabin stayed cold despite the fire. I wore my jacket inside. That evening, after dinner, I reached for the guest log again. I wanted to read more of the older entries to get a sense of the people who came here. I opened it near the back and flipped forward this time, reading carefully. That's when I noticed the problem. My name appeared halfway through the book. At first, I thought I was tired. I closed it and opened it again. Slower. Same page. Same line. My full name spelled correctly. No nickname. The date matched exactly 2 weeks before my arrival. The handwriting was mine. Not similar. Not close. Identical. The same pressure marks, the same slight hook on the last letter. Even the note beneath it echoed my style. Short. Observational. A comment about snow still holding in the shade. I checked the front of the book to be sure I hadn't skipped pages. I counted forward. There was no missing space. The entry was embedded among others, surrounded by different names, different hands. I sat still for a long time, holding the book open on my knees. I tried to remember if I had ever been here before. I hadn't. I had never heard of the place until the forum post. I checked my camera. The arrival photos were there. The timestamps were correct. No gaps. No strange edits. My phone showed the same. I scrolled back through messages, emails, calendar entries. Everything lined up. I had been at home 2 weeks earlier, working, posting photos online, answering comments. I told myself the explanation had to be simple. Someone copied my name from the forum. Someone mimicked my handwriting as a joke. Maybe the owner kept blank entries and filled them in later. The rational options felt thin, but they existed. I kept reading. The entries after that date grew shorter. Some lines trailed off. Several guests mentioned poor sleep, trouble concentrating, the quiet feeling heavier than expected. Nothing dramatic, just discomfort. The last page was nearly blank. At the bottom, written smaller than the rest, was a note I hadn't noticed before. If you read this twice, don't stay for the third night. There was no name attached, no date. I closed the book and stood up. The cabin felt tighter. I walked the perimeter, checked the door, the window latches, the stove. Everything was solid. No signs of anyone else. The snow outside remained smooth. No new tracks. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the lamp on and the camera beside the bed. Morning arrived slowly, light seeping through clouds. I decided to leave early, but not in a panic. I packed carefully, took photos of the cabin interior as proof, and looked for the log one last time. It wasn't on the table. I searched the shelves, the desk drawers, under the bed. I checked my bag in case I'd moved it without thinking. Nothing. The notebook was gone. The pen too. There were no marks on the table where it had rested. No indentation. Outside, the snow near the cabin looked disturbed. Not footprints exactly. More like shallow drag marks, as if something had been pulled across the surface and covered again by loose powder. They led away from the cabin toward the trees and disappeared where the ground dipped. I left at dawn. The drive out felt longer. Every turn looked the same. When I reached cell service, my phone filled with notifications. Among them was a new email from the forum account that had contacted me. It thanked me for participating and asked if I would be willing to write a short testimonial about my stay. Attached was a scanned image. It was a page from the guest log. My name was on it. The same entry dated 2 weeks before. Below it, in smaller writing, was a note I hadn't seen before. Left early. Would not return. I understood then. The cabin wasn't haunted. No time loops. No missing days. The owner curated the experience. They collected names, writing samples, photos, forum posts. They practiced copying handwriting. They planted doubt. The log was bait. The warning was real, but not for the reason it claimed. Anyone who stayed the third night stayed long enough to question themselves, to lose confidence in memory and record. Those people didn't leave testimonials. They didn't post online. Some probably never spoke about it at all. The missing log meant the process had reset. My entry would be used for the next guest with my name or someone close enough. Proof that it worked. I deleted the photos from the cabin. I never replied to the email. I stopped entering contests. I stopped trusting places that promised isolation as a gift. Everything that happened there had an explanation. Someone wanted control over how long people stayed, how unsettled they felt, and what they remembered afterward. I left before the third night exactly as instructed, and that choice made all the difference. I rented the cabin because I needed quiet and because it was cheap. It sat on the edge of a long logging road that had not seen real use in years. The listing showed pine trees, a small porch, and a wood stove. No neighbors, no cell service. That was fine with me. I told myself it would help me reset after months of noise and screens. I drove there in late fall, when the trees were bare and the ground stayed damp all day. The road in was narrow and broken. Mud pulled at my tires. Fallen branches scraped the sides of my car. I passed one rusted gate pushed open and hanging sideways. No signs, no tracks except my own. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even the birds stopped making noise. When I reached the cabin, the air felt still, like the woods were holding their breath. The cabin was smaller than the photos. One room, a tiny bathroom, and a loft with a mattress. The porch boards were warped. The door stuck when I opened it. Inside, it smelled like cold wood and old dust. There was a table, 2 chairs, a couch with thin cushions, and a wood stove with a pile of split logs beside it. Everything looked used but not broken. I locked the door without thinking. The lock was simple and old. I unpacked, started a fire, and walked around the area to get my bearings. The trees were close together. The ground was soft with wet leaves. I found a short path behind the cabin that led to nothing, just a clearing where someone had once stacked firewood. There were no fresh footprints, no trash, no signs of recent activity. That should have made me feel better. It did not. As evening came, the temperature dropped fast. The fire popped and cracked. Shadows stretched across the walls. I cooked simple food and ate at the table. The silence pressed in. Every small sound felt loud. The wind moved through the trees in slow waves. It sounded uneven, like it was stopping and starting on purpose. That night, I slept in the loft. I woke up several times for no clear reason. Each time, I lay still and listened. The cabin made normal noises, wood shifting, the stove ticking as it cooled. Nothing else. Near morning, I heard something outside. Not an animal. It was slow and heavy, like careful steps in wet leaves. It stopped near the porch. I waited, holding my breath. After a long moment, the sound moved away. In the morning, I told myself it was a deer or maybe a bear passing through. I went outside to check. The ground was soft enough to hold prints. I saw them right away. Boot prints. Large. Deep at the heel. They circled the cabin once and stopped near the porch steps. Then they headed back toward the trees. They did not come from the road. I stood there for a long time, staring at the ground. The prints were not old. The edges were sharp. Someone had been there while I slept. I felt exposed, like the trees had leaned in closer overnight. I went back inside and locked the door again. I checked the windows. They were small and dirty but intact. I considered leaving. I even packed my bag halfway. Then I told myself I was overreacting. Hunters used these woods. Maybe someone got lost. Maybe they were just curious. I stayed. The second day passed slowly. The sky stayed gray. I chopped wood, cleaned the cabin, and tried to read. I kept looking up. I kept listening. Every time the wind died, the silence felt heavy. In the afternoon, I walked farther down the path behind the cabin. I found another set of prints. Same size, same tread. They were fresh. They followed the tree line, never stepping into the open. That night, I kept the fire going longer than needed. I slept in my clothes. I placed a chair under the door handle, even though I knew it would not stop much. I turned off my light early to avoid being seen through the windows. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that did not belong. It was a slow scrape like wood against wood. Came from the front of the cabin. Then it stopped. Minutes passed. My heart kept pounding. I heard it again, closer this time. The door handle moved just enough to make a soft click. Whoever was outside did not rush. They tested it once and waited. I stayed still. I did not make a sound. The handle moved again. Then the scraping returned, lower this time, near the base of the door. I realized they were trying to lift it, to feel how it was set. The chair shifted slightly. The noise stopped. I waited for hours. I did not sleep again that night. When morning came, the light felt weak and thin. I went outside carefully. The ground near the door was torn up. Deep boot marks pressed into the mud. The porch board had fresh scratches. One of the windows had a smear of dirt where someone had leaned close. I packed everything. I did not finish breakfast. I loaded my car and started down the road. After about a mile, I saw something ahead. A truck was parked across part of the road, angled like it had been left in a hurry. No plates, old paint, mud covering the sides. I slowed but did not stop. As I passed, I saw movement in the trees to my right. Someone stepped back out of sight. I pressed the gas. The road twisted and dipped. My car slid once but kept going. I did not look back. When I reached the main road, my hands were shaking. I drove until I had service. I did not call the cabin owner. I did not report anything. I just wanted distance. Weeks later, I checked the listing again. The cabin was no longer there. The page showed an error. I searched the address and found nothing. I still think about those prints, about how they came from the woods and not the road. I think about the slow way the handle moved, like the person outside had all the time in the world. I know now that the cabin was never empty. It was just waiting. My name's Marcus Hale, and I spend most winters alone by choice. I test gear for small manufacturers and write reports that never get published anywhere public. Sleeping systems, cold weather stoves, layered clothing, shelters meant for people who plan to stay put when the weather turns bad. I trust isolation because it removes variables. If something fails, it fails because of design or my own mistake, not because someone else interfered. That winter, I booked a Forest Service rental cabin in a high-elevation drainage that stayed cold well into spring. The listing was plain and specific. Locked by code. Inspected weekly when conditions allowed. No services. No nearby trails once snow set in. That was exactly what I wanted. I planned 5 nights, long enough to test gear under steady exposure without pushing into unnecessary risk. The road in was plowed only to the gate. From there, I skied the remaining mile with a sled. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by thick lodgepole pine. The trees stood close enough to block most wind, but not enough to trap snow drifting against the walls. The building itself was basic. Square footprint, low-pitched metal roof, raised a few inches on piers. No porch, just a door, 2 windows, and a stovepipe. Inside, everything was as expected. Bare bunks, table, firewood stacked neatly by the wall. Inspection tags tacked near the door showed dates spaced evenly. No gaps, no notes of concern. I set up my sleeping system, unpacked my instruments, and logged baseline temperatures before dark. The first night was quiet. The second day brought steady snow. Not heavy, but constant. Small flakes that fell straight down. No wind, no swirl. By late afternoon, the clearing looked muted. Edges softened. Sound dampened. I noted accumulation depth every hour. When it stopped after sunset, the cabin felt sealed into the landscape. The next morning, I stepped outside and paused longer than I intended. The snow around the cabin was smooth, not just undisturbed. Smooth in a way that didn't match natural snowfall. No fox tracks, no bird hops, no branch drag marks, no texture from shifting air. It looked pressed, as if it had settled all at once rather than over hours. I walked the perimeter slowly. The snow surface held my weight until it didn't, then collapsed in clean breaks around my boots. That part made sense. What didn't was the depression, about shoulder height off the ground, running in a rough circle around the cabin. The snow was compressed inward, not carved, not gouged, just pushed. The depth varied slightly but stayed consistent enough to suggest a continuous force rather than separate impacts. It wasn't at ground level, and it wasn't on the roofline. It wrapped the walls where a person might lean back if they pressed their shoulder against the siding. I measured it with my arm. The height matched my own shoulder within an inch. I took photos from multiple angles. I checked the walls. No marks, no scuffs. The snow was the only thing affected. I considered wind loading, but the trees showed no corresponding pattern. Snow on branches sat loosely, not sculpted. I considered slew from the roof, but the metal panels were clean, and the roof pitch sent any slide well clear of the walls. I considered my own movement, but I had arrived before the snowfall and had not circled the cabin afterward. I logged the observation and moved on. Gear testing requires discipline. Not everything needs an explanation in the moment. That day passed without issue. I ran stove efficiency tests, boiled water at measured intervals, rotated gloves and liners. As night came, the temperature dropped hard. I sealed the cabin, banked the stove, and slept. The next morning, the depression was deeper. The snow surface beyond it remained smooth, untouched. Inside the compressed band, the snow leaned inward more noticeably, as if something heavy had rested there for a longer time. I knelt and examined the structure of the snow. The crystals were crushed, fused together in layers that suggested sustained pressure rather than impact. Still no tracks. I expanded my search radius. 50 yards out, the snow remained clean. No approach path, no exit path, no signs of animals burrowing or falling from trees. The depression circled the entire cabin except where the door stood, where it dipped lower and spread wider, as if weight had shifted there. That afternoon I felt watched for the first time, though I rejected the word as soon as it crossed my mind. It wasn't a presence. It was awareness of exposure, the sense that the clearing was too open, that the smooth snow made me visible in a way I didn't like. I stayed busy to keep my thoughts anchored. On the third night, the sound woke me. It wasn't scratching. It wasn't tapping. It was pressure. A slow, deliberate force applied to the wall near my head. The logs creaked in response, not from impact but from weight settling and adjusting. The sound moved along the wall in increments, pausing, shifting, pressing again. I stayed still. My breathing slowed on its own. I listened for cracking, for splintering, for any sign of structural failure. None came. The pressure never increased beyond what the cabin could bear. Felt measured. The stove ticked softly as it cooled. Frost creaked on the window glass. The weight shifted again, lower this time, then moved on. It lasted several minutes. When it stopped, there was no retreat sound. No release, just absence. I did not leave the cabin that night. Morning light came gray and flat. I opened the door carefully and stepped out. The depression was fully formed now. Deeper, wider, more defined. The snow had been compressed evenly around the entire structure, shoulder height, with a second lower band near waist level where the weight had adjusted. The surface inside the ring had settled lower, as if the cabin had been hugged by something heavy enough to displace air and snow without breaking either. I packed immediately. I did not panic. I did not run. I followed procedure. I documented everything, loaded my sled, and left the clearing without circling the cabin again. At the trailhead, I stopped and looked back once. From that distance, the cabin looked normal. The depression blended into shadow. When I reported back days later, the inspection record showed no damage. The walls were straight, the foundation level, no signs of impact, no animal activity noted. Weather logs showed calm conditions during my stay. No high winds, no unusual snowfall events. I did not mention the snow. I reviewed my data at home with a clear head. I compared photos. I studied the compression patterns. The answer came slowly, grounded in mechanics rather than fear. The cabin had been sealed too well. During the snowfall, heat from inside escaped evenly through the walls. Not enough to melt snow outright, but enough to soften it uniformly. The snow settled and fused as a single mass instead of layering naturally. At night, when temperatures dropped, the structure contracted. The logs shifted microscopically, pressing outward as internal air pressure changed. The effect was slow, sustained force applied from within, transferred through the walls into the softened snow. As the cabin cooled, the pressure redistributed. Not walking, not moving, leaning in the only way a building can. On the third night, the pressure I heard was thermal contraction amplified by cold saturation. The cabin adjusting to temperature change, the walls pressing against the compacted snow that now resisted movement. Weight without intent, force without motion. The depression was the record of that interaction. I never mentioned it because nothing had been wrong. The cabin did exactly what physics allowed. The environment responded exactly as it should. The feeling came from misunderstanding the scale and patience of cold. I still test winter gear. I still go alone. But I no longer sleep pressed against exterior walls. And I no longer ignore how quiet snow can be when it's listening to heat. I went up there alone after my divorce because silence felt safer than people. The cabin belonged to my uncle. He stopped using it in the early 2000s when the logging roads started closing and the forest stopped feeling like something you passed through and started feeling like something that swallowed things. The place sat high enough that the air stayed sharp even in late summer. No running water, a propane fridge that hummed unevenly, a generator that only worked if you pulled the cord just right and kept your hand steady on the choke. I wanted quiet and cold air and nothing else. The road in was barely a road. Grass grew through the ruts. Fallen branches scraped the undercarriage. I parked where the trees widened and carried my bags the last stretch. The cabin looked the same as it had when I was younger, just smaller, like it had shrunk back into itself. The roof sagged on one side. The porch rail leaned away from the steps. Pine needles covered everything, thick enough to mute sound. Inside, the air smelled like dust, mouse droppings, old wood, and propane. I opened windows to let light in. I swept the floor with a broom that left streaks in the dirt. I checked the locks. The door still shut clean. The windows were old single panes with warped frames. Nothing felt broken. Nothing felt welcoming either. The first thing that felt wrong was the trash pit behind the cabin. My uncle dug it years ago, downwind, past the trees where the ground dipped. I went back there to dump my food scraps. The pit had fresh burn marks. Not old ash, not gray. The wood was still black and cracked. Some pieces still smelled sharp. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the edges. Someone had been careful. The fire was contained. No trash scattered. No sign of animals. I told myself hunters passed through. That happened sometimes. I did not like how neat it was. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No wind. No owls. I lay on the bed listening to the cabin settle. The walls popped with the temperature drop. I slept in blocks, waking often, checking the windows. The second morning, I walked the perimeter. I looked for footprints near the trash pit. I found none. The ground was dry. The needles hid everything. On the second night, I saw the muddy boot prints. It had rained late that afternoon. A short, hard rain that left the ground dark and slick. When I went out to stack more firewood near the wall, the prints caught my eye. They came from the tree straight to the cabin wall. They were deep, heavy, adult boots. The tread was clear. They stopped inches from the window by the table. No prints leaving. I followed them back with my eyes, expecting to see a turn, a scuff, something. Nothing. The rain should have softened them. It had not been long enough. I told myself the person stood there, then stepped backward into their own prints. It was thin logic. I accepted it because I needed to. That night I locked the door. I slid a chair under the knob. The generator stayed off. I used lanterns. The fridge hummed. The forest stayed still. The next morning, something small felt off. I noticed it while making food. My bread was on the table. I always kept it in the cabinet because mice got in. I stood there holding the jar of peanut butter, staring at the loaf. I checked the cabinet. The door was closed. The shelf was empty. I assumed I had forgotten. I put the bread back. Later, I opened the drawer for the knife. It was clean. Too clean. I remembered wiping it on my pants the night before after cutting meat. The blade faced the wrong direction in the drawer. I had always kept it the other way so I would not cut myself. I closed the drawer and stood there until the feeling passed. I told myself grief did this to the brain. Divorce rearranged memory. Stress made gaps. I did not leave immediately. I should have. I stayed because leaving felt like another failure. Because the cabin was supposed to be empty. Because I did not want to drive back down the road and explain to myself why I could not handle a few nights alone. That afternoon, I walked farther out, up the slope behind the cabin. I found old logging scars half grown over. I found a narrow game trail that bent toward a rocky outcrop. Near it, tucked into brush, was a shallow depression lined with leaves and plastic. Tarp edge showed. I did not touch it. I stood there long enough to see how still the air was. I walked back without looking over my shoulder. That night, I put the knife on the table. I set the lantern near the bed. I kept my boots on. I slept light. I woke to the sound of breathing on the other side of the bedroom wall. It was slow, measured, close enough that I could hear the pause between inhale and exhale. The wall was thin boards and insulation. The sound did not move. It did not scrape. It did not speak. It stayed level, like someone resting their face near the boards. I lay still. I counted breaths until my chest hurt. The sound stopped. I waited longer. When I finally moved, the lantern shook in my hand. I did not open the door. I did not turn on the generator. I stayed until dawn, sitting upright, listening for any shift. In the morning, I checked the outside wall. There were fresh scuffs near the base, where boots had dug in. The window had a smear, like a forehead or a cheek pressed to glass. The print was partial skin oil catching light. I wiped it with my sleeve and felt sick when it smeared instead of lifting. I packed fast. I did not clean. I did not check the trash pit. On my way out, I circled wide and looked toward the outcrop. The tarp was gone. I drove until I had service. I reported a trespasser to the local ranger station. I gave directions as best I could. I did not say how long I stayed. I did not say I had slept through the first signs. 2 weeks later, an officer called. They found a man living near the cabin. He had been there off and on for years, moving with the seasons, staying near closed roads. He used abandoned places when he could. He burned trash to keep animals away. He watched cabins to learn patterns. He entered when people slept or when they walked far enough out. He took food. He cleaned tools. He put things back wrong to see if anyone noticed. He had pressed his face to the wall because he liked to hear breathing match his. He left when people stirred. They arrested him down the slope, near a different cabin, after someone else noticed tracks. I have not been back. I sold my uncle's place to the state for land consolidation. The papers came with a check and a map and a paragraph about safety. What stays with me is not the man. It is how long I stayed after the first clear sign. How easy it was to explain away blackened wood and prints that ended at glass. How quiet the forest can get when someone is close and waiting. There were 4 of us, college friends who had not shared a room in years, renting a cheap off-grid cabin for a long weekend because it cost less than a city hotel and promised trees and quiet. We drove up in 2 cars, loaded with coolers and backpacks, planning to hike during the day and drink at night. Nothing extreme, no survival plans, no phones that worked once the road narrowed and the bars vanished. The cabin sat low in a bowl of trees, not on a ridge or by a lake, just tucked into a shallow dip where the ground curved inward. Pines ringed it tight. The road ended 100 yards away. The owner told us to park and walk the rest. The place looked older than the photos. Tin roof patched in spots. Porch boards worn smooth. 1 window on each side. A back door that opened toward a slope and more trees. The first thing I noticed was how Saond behaved. When we unloaded, our footsteps did not carry the way they usually did in the woods. Our voices came back at us. Not loud echoes, just delayed and thin, like someone replaying them from farther away. It made us talk over each other. Laughter felt off, stretched, then cut short. We joked about it and kept moving. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood and propane. There was a table for mismatched chairs, a couch with a sag in the middle, and 2 bunk beds in 1 room. No power. Lanterns hung on hooks. A wood stove sat cold. We dropped bags and went back out to set a fire ring and crack the first beers. The bowl of trees swallowed the smoke. It rose, then folded back down, drifting sideways through the trunks. The light faded fast. As it got darker, the sound delay became more noticeable. Someone would say something, and a thin version of it would return a second later from a different direction. It did not sound like an echo off rock. It sounded like distance. We drank more than planned. We cooked on the fire. We talked about classes, jobs, breakups, all the usual stuff that feels heavier when the night is quiet. I remember noticing that the forest around us stayed still. No wind in the needles. No animals moving close. The fire popped loud in the hush. On the second night, after a long hike and more drinking, the air turned cold enough that breath showed. We sat around the fire, close to the heat. Evan sat across from me, leaning back on his hands. The others were to my left. The sound delay was worse. Our words came back slow and warped. At some point, Evan stiffened. He looked past me, toward the trees behind my shoulder. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but trunks and darkness. He did not speak right away. He just watched. When he finally reacted, it was with confusion on his face, not fear. He had heard me whisper his name from outside the ring of light. I had not moved. I had not leaned away. I had not left the fire at any point. We all looked at each other, then at the trees. No one stood. No one laughed. The delay made it hard to tell where sound came from. We decided it had been the bowl, the way our voices bent and came back. We drank more. We kept the fire going. About 30 minutes later, it happened to me. I heard Evan say my name slowly from the treeline behind him. The sound came from the dark, stretched, careful, like someone testing it. Evan was sitting across from me the entire time, hands visible, staring at the fire. His mouth did not move. I did not react right away. I waited for the echo. Nothing followed. There were no footsteps, no branches snapping, just that voice, then the fire and our breathing. My skin went tight along my arms. I watched Evan's face, waiting for him to notice something I had missed. He stayed still. We ended the fire early. We carried the lanterns inside and locked the door, though the lock was more habit than security. The cabin felt smaller with all of us inside. The sound delay followed us. When someone shifted on a bunk, the creak came back thin and late from the walls. I slept in short bursts. Every time I woke, I listened for the delay. I heard breathing that was not mine and then realized it was just returned to me slow. My head hurt from it. In the morning, the cold light made the place feel normal again. We ate from bags and mugs. No one mentioned the night in detail. We went hiking to shake it off. The bowl swallowed our footsteps. When we talked, the delay made it feel like someone else was with us, just out of sight. That afternoon, one of us went around back to look for more firewood near the slope. That was when we saw the marks on the back door. Long vertical grooves ran down the wood near the latch. Uneven spacing, deep enough to catch a fingernail, too wide to be fingernails, too narrow and irregular to be any tool we recognized. They were fresh, the wood pale where it had been cut. We stood there longer than needed, touching the grooves, measuring them with our eyes. The door itself was solid. No pry marks on the frame, just those lines like someone had dragged something down the surface with pressure and stopped. We packed that afternoon. No debate. We did not hike again. We did not drink. The drive out felt longer. The road noise filled the cars and felt like relief. Weeks later, after we were back in our routines, I called the owner to let him know about the marks. I did not describe the voices in detail. I asked if animals got back there. He said people often left early. He said the bowl did strange things to sound. He said someone had been living in the trees on and off, moving camps when owners noticed signs. He said the marks were from metal spikes some climbers used, worn into gloves, dragged without thought. He said the person mimicked voices to see who reacted, to learn patterns, to keep distance. He never asked why we left. He did not need to. I later learned about voice mimicry, how some people practice it, how distance and delay can sell it. I learned how sound can bend in low ground with dense trees, how it can return without direction. I learned that alcohol sharpens some senses and dulls judgment. What I still think about is how careful the timing was. How the names came only once, never repeated. How no one rushed the cabin. How the marks stopped short of damage. Someone had been close enough to listen, patient enough to wait, smart enough to use the place itself. That made the bowl feel less like a trick of nature and more like a tool.